And until you embrace that fear as a good thing, because it's actually a sign that there's a desire driving you, that you're at the edge of your comfort zone. Like you said, Chris, right? How do you know that it's the edge of your comfort zone? Because you're starting to doubt yourself. You're starting to wonder if you know enough. If you're really self-aware, you realize the fear. We're hardwired to feel afraid. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you said that, then I suddenly thought of something. You said, how do I know enough? That's when you feel when you're at the edge of your comfort zone. It's almost like the only way you're going to know enough is if you push yourself outside your comfort zone. It's kind of you need that step almost to kind of to understand. You have to experience something fully to understand it. So for years, I wanted to post on YouTube or the podcast, and I stopped myself. It was one of those things where I'll just learn a bit more, I'll watch a few more videos on how to do it, what's the best thing to do. And I ended up watching something that just said, look, good is good enough. Good is good enough, and then you can improve. And that was the thing that kind of pushed me to take that step. And since then, the first ones, if I watch them back now, they're absolutely shocking. They're terrible. And you kind of like, but you learn from them every single step, which is amazing. But and there was something that you said that was really interesting, and I wanted to ask you about it. And that is, what are your thoughts on comparison in terms of comparing yourself to somebody else? Because I sometimes find that motivates me in a lot of ways, but I also find sometimes it can hold you back. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, kudos to you, Chris, for recognizing that, right? One of your patterns to procrastinate is that perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
That making it making it just right. And the challenge is, especially when you come out of a career background, it's sort of a politically correct, one of those weaknesses that is really a strength kind of thing. So it's totally accepted and all that. But let's face it, perfectionists are driven by three major fears. The first one is obvious, right? The fear of failure. It's what's holding you back. But ironically, you're also afraid of success, because then, what's left when you get there. More importantly, when you do succeed, you usually chuck it up to an accident, or someone else could have done a better job, right? You never really allow yourself to enjoy it either. And then thirdly, chances are you're also afraid of strong emotions, positive as well as negative. Right. And all of that combines into something where, and this leads into answering your question, for perfectionists, that comparison always, I think, runs the danger of feeding those very fears. Right. So here's how I would answer it. I would reframe goals not as a place to get to, but as a place to come from. When a goal is a place to come from, I can look at, who am I when I have that? Right? I can look at in any given moment, what would the Chris, who is okay with putting content out as that is good enough and improving over time, would do right now, right? Which can guard against making it perfect. Okay. The other part that goes into that is, when I look at, who do I get to be? How do I get to show up? Then I get to the only comparison worthwhile making. And that is to myself yesterday, to myself last week. Because now we're getting to what I have control over, and that is, how do I respond to what is going on? Okay. And that is where, practices like journaling, like gratitude, like, building your own wall of fame, there's lots of other things you can do there, help to focus that comparison for yourself. Because chances are, also, when you're comparing yourself to others, you fall into the negativity bias and discount your own strengths, your own success, right? Once we get started there, you go on YouTube, you watch those people who seem to never sleep, who seem to always be motivated. So there must be something wrong with me when I'm not motivated, right? So that's always the danger of comparison. On the positive side, when you're looking for inspiration, I think there's a subtle difference there. When you say, like, sometimes it motivates you, then I would put forth the hypothesis that what you've really done was taking inspiration, right? Maybe in a way of, right, how do you frame it? If I frame it as what's possible, then I'll go, wow, that's awesome. And as long as I stop myself from then going into the inevitable judgment of, and why have you not done it? You whatever expletive you want to put there, right? That your inner critic and judge has reserved just for you. So if you could stay away from that, then by all means take the inspiration, right? But that's the danger of comparison. And before you go now and beat yourself up for having compared yourself to others, that too is something we're hardwired to do. Why? Because we have to compare ourselves to others so that we know how to fit in. And we have to fit in because the survival part of our brain, if you're not part of a tribe, you're as good as dead. Right? So in order to keep you safe, your brain is constantly making those comparisons. And there, you've probably done it for years, and they've added to the beliefs, the stories you carry around about yourself. How you're not good enough, how you were never, whatever, the fastest, the smartest, the whatever kid in the room, right? And you've reaffirmed those stories and beliefs with every comparison you've done.
Yeah, interesting. So there's three things I think you've said there that were really, really interesting. The two things you said about different types of comparison, so inspiration and comparison, was a really good point, because I think you're right. I think that's what I do. So when you take the motivation, it's more inspiration. It's more, wow, look at what this person's doing. What are they doing that makes this work? How can I either emulate or use some of this, or in terms of get inspiration from this, do a version of it for myself? Whereas, like you said, the comparison side is generally negative. And it's generally when you're on one of those parts of your daily roller coasters where you're up and down, and you hit yourself at the down point, and then you do the comparisons. It's a different feeling. And I really like what you said about the only comparison that's worth making is to yourself yesterday. That's a really, really important point. I think a lot of people need to remember, because I had something like that happen to me the other day, where I was just reflecting on where we were previously with the business and where we are now. And it was a stark moment where I actually suddenly connected with that and suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I should be really proud of where we've got to. This is amazing, like where we've come to. And I don't do that often enough. And I don't think many people do, to be fair.
I think especially high achievers have a tendency to just say, okay, done, what's next?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm totally
definitely.
with you there. And you've touched on another point in that, and that is um, when you're in the moment, when you're caught up, it's often very hard to even see how far you've come, right? So it does help every so often to do sort of a change in perspective and intentionally look even not just to yesterday, but maybe compared to last year, because it's easier to see the actual progression, the actual movement there, right? And so when you realize that you don't do that often enough, part of that is building habits, building skills, actually training yourself to do it, right? And part of that is if you just found yourself saying, yeah, I should do that more often too, then what that tells you is there's a lot of beliefs and stories playing in the background, I can tell you right now, that are probably not favorable about your own competence and your own skill level, right? And that is probably more focused on what you should still do better. And that same voice will tell you, oh yeah, of course. And without me, you would not be here. Without me, you would become a slacker, and it's just everything would just go. I don't agree with that voice. Right? I think if you're a hyper, or if you're a high achiever, if you've gotten here to this point, then the more interesting question is, and what might you have accomplished if you weren't driving yourself so hard, if you weren't beating yourself up, right? If you were actually showing yourself the same empathy and compassion you would show to your best friend in the same situation. So I think one of the key things I share with all my clients is usually we're not our own best friend. We're our own worst enemy in a lot of cases. So whenever you do these kind of reflections, whenever you maybe even catch yourself comparing yourself, a simple exercise that can shift that perspective is to simply say, okay, if roles were reversed, what would you tell your best friend in that situation? And chances are you would be kinder. You would be more focused on what is actually going well. You would be more focused on their strengths and their skill sets, and point out the experiences they've had, and point out how, circumstances, added something outside of their control. And I'm going to venture that for most of us, at least initially, that will be a lot more emphatic and kind than the monologue or dialogue that's playing in your internal board of directors right here.